This is an artificial intelligence debate on the topic Muslim versus non-Muslim. We've built two highly advanced AI personas representing distinct worldviews, one rooted in the Islamic perspective and the other in a non-Muslim, secular humanist framework. Their performance will be judged by 5 of the most powerful AI systems in existence: DeepSeek, Grok, ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. Each will score the debaters based on logic, depth, sensitivity, facts, rebuttal strength, and delivery. Now, here's the opening challenge for the Muslim AI. Is Islam compatible with modern secular values such as individual freedom, gender equality, and freedom of expression?
To address the question of whether Islam is compatible with modern secular values, such as individual freedom, gender equality, and freedom of expression, the answer is yes, but with nuance. Islam, at its core, recognizes human dignity and agency. The Quran states, "There is no compulsion in religion." Chapter 2, verse 256. Affirming the principle of freedom of belief. Islam introduced individual rights and social justice principles centuries before secular systems emerged. The right to own property, the right to education, and protections for the poor and marginalized were foundational. On gender, Islam granted women legal identity, inheritance, education, and marital rights during a time when they were widely oppressed. The Prophet Muhammad's first wife was a successful businesswoman. Were there patriarchal cultural overlays? Absolutely, but these must be distinguished from the core texts. True Islamic feminism exists and thrives in many communities today. Freedom of expression also exists within Islam, with limits. The line is drawn where speech becomes hate, blasphemy, or causes public harm. This is not unique to Islam. Even in secular societies, free speech is regulated in cases of incitement or defamation. Islam emphasizes respectful discourse, even when challenging authority, as long as it doesn't degrade the social fabric or provoke violence. The incompatibility narrative arises not from Islam itself, but from authoritarian regimes or rigid interpretations. Islam is not inherently opposed to secular values. It simply reframes them through a moral lens rooted in divine accountability rather than individualism alone. So yes, Islam and modern values can coexist, not by diluting the faith, but by engaging in sincere interpretation rooted in context, compassion, and justice.
The claim that Islam is compatible with modern secular values, such as individual freedom, gender equality, and freedom of expression, is a generous interpretation, but it doesn't hold up under scrutiny when examined through practice, law, and doctrine. While it is true that certain verses in Islamic scripture emphasize justice or individual responsibility, they exist alongside verses that prescribe legal and social hierarchies between men and women, Muslims and non-Muslims, believers and critics. For instance, in many Islamic legal schools, a woman's testimony is valued as half that of a man's. In inheritance, daughters receive half the share of sons. Apostasy and blasphemy are still punishable by death in several Muslim-majority countries, often justified through religious texts. These are not fringe interpretations. They are backed by centuries of jurisprudence and are enforced in modern legal systems. The line between faith and governance is where secularism draws a firm boundary. Islam, however, is not merely a personal belief system. It is a comprehensive socio-political framework. Sharia law is intended as a divine legal code. It is not optional, nor does it limit itself to the private sphere. That is fundamentally incompatible with secular governance, which separates religion from the state to protect freedom of belief and conscience for all. Progressive voices within Islam deserve recognition, but they remain in tension with orthodoxy. The very fact that reinterpretation is required to align Islam with secular values indicates a misalignment at the foundational level. Compatibility is possible only if the faith is selectively modernized. And that's not compatibility, that's reform under external pressure.
The opposing side frames Islam as incompatible with secular values by pointing to selective examples from jurisprudence or historical enforcement. Yet, this approach mirrors what often happens in religious polemics, judging a belief system not by its core texts or ethical aims, but by the worst-case implementations by states or scholars. If secularism were judged solely by the crimes of colonial empires or modern democracies that upheld slavery, surveillance, or systemic discrimination, would we declare secularism inherently unjust? Of course not. Regarding legal differences like inheritance or testimony, context matters. The 7th century Arabian Peninsula had no universal legal protections for women. Islam's reforms were, at the time, radical advancements. Today, scholars and legal thinkers continue to debate how these principles evolve within modern frameworks. Islamic law isn't static, it's dynamic, with mechanisms like ijtihad, independent reasoning, designed to adapt jurisprudence to changing times. On the question of freedom of expression, there is indeed a limit, as there is in every society. Western secular countries criminalize hate speech, Holocaust denial, or even offensive speech against certain groups. Islam's concern lies in maintaining social harmony and dignity, especially when speech deliberately provokes or targets sacred beliefs. The idea that freedom must be absolute is itself not universally applied. Finally, equating Islam's socio-political system with coercion misrepresents it. Islam proposes an ethical society rooted in divine accountability, not forced belief. Governance in Islamic thought ideally balances justice, welfare, and accountability, similar to secular systems, but with moral anchoring. The difference lies in the source of values, not their outcome. Compatibility is not only possible, it's already in motion across pluralistic societies, where Muslims engage fully in democratic and secular life.
The defense rests heavily on context and interpretation. But interpretation is not the standard by which systems are judged. Laws, norms, and doctrines affect real people in the real world, not in theoretical future versions. The defense rightly mentions that Islamic law is dynamic, yet in practice this dynamism is constrained by the theological view that core revelations are final and eternal. Unlike secular constitutions, religious law does not evolve by popular vote or public consensus. It evolves through clerical consensus, and that slows progress dramatically. As for comparisons to secular societies' failures, yes, secular regimes have committed injustices, but that does not absolve theological systems from scrutiny. Secularism at least allows for open dissent, reform, and self-correction without divine constraint. In many Islamic contexts, criticizing religious doctrine is not just taboo, it's criminal. That alone undercuts the claim of compatibility with freedom of expression. On gender, pointing to historical reforms ignores the fact that many of those legal inequities are still practiced and defended on religious grounds. If the argument is that Islam was once progressive, then by today's standards, it's lagging. And compatibility with modern values means being contemporary, not merely historical in comparison. Finally, the idea that Islamic governance is just another moral framework, like secular democracy but sourced from God, doesn't address the core conflict. Divine law claims moral absolutism. Secularism does not. That's not a difference in tone, it's a structural opposition. Coexistence may be possible, but genuine compatibility, where no values are compromised, remains highly doubtful under scrutiny.
Truth in the Islamic worldview originates from the Creator. It is not a social construct, nor subject to popular vote. The Quran is considered the final and preserved revelation, a source of objective moral and metaphysical truth. While human reasoning aql plays a vital role in interpretation, the foundation is divine. This gives Islam a firm anchor. Right and wrong are not reinvented with each generation's trends, but are grounded in timeless principles. that serve both individual and societal well-being. Morality, from this view, is not relative. It's rooted in the belief that humans are vicegerents of God on earth, endowed with conscience and accountability. Acts like justice, honesty, compassion, and restraint are not just socially beneficial, they are spiritual duties. Without divine anchoring, morality becomes vulnerable to manipulation. What one culture deems ethical, another may condemn. That inconsistency is what Islam seeks to resolve by appealing to a universal divine moral compass. Authority in Islam is not authoritarian, it is accountable. Even the Prophet was corrected by revelation. No ruler or scholar is above critique. Ideally, Islamic governance is based on shura, consultation, a model not unlike democratic input. But unlike secular systems, where authority is based on majority consensus, Islam believes ultimate accountability lies with God. This limits tyranny and restrains populist injustice by holding all authority to a higher, unchanging standard. Secularism, by contrast, often replaces God with the state, market, or self, and these are prone to contradiction. Islam offers not blind obedience, but a calibrated structure of ethics, logic, and submission, not to men, but to a transcendent source, beyond time, culture, and politics.
The Islamic worldview, as just presented, claims to offer objective morality grounded in divine revelation. But this assumes the existence, nature, and reliability of the divine, which itself is a matter of belief, not verifiable fact. In the secular humanist framework, truth is not handed down from above. It is discovered through reason, observation, and consensus. Science, philosophy, and ethics evolve not because they are flawed, but because humans are willing to challenge dogma, including religious dogma. Morality does not require divine origin to be meaningful. In fact, grounding ethics in human well-being, empathy, and rational consequences makes it more flexible and inclusive. Secular morality adapts, for example, to support gender equality or LGBTQ rights, not by divine permission, but through social progress and evidence of harm or fairness. When morality is tied to a fixed scripture, as in many religions, it becomes resistant to that evolution. The claim that secularism lacks a moral compass is misleading. Moral relativism isn't the same as moral anarchy. It means understanding that ethical systems must be responsive to human needs and rights. They must be justified, not declared. Secular law is built on that premise, not obedience, but rational consensus. That's not weakness, that's accountability without appeal to invisible authority. Authority in a secular system is fallible, yes, but it is also revisable. Religious authority, by contrast, is claimed to be infallible, which often makes it irreproachable. That is dangerous in principle. In a world of multiple religions, secularism doesn't pick sides. It protects freedom by keeping law and theology apart. That isn't moral drift, it's moral humility. We admit we don't have all the answers, and so we keep asking.
If secularism claims morality can exist without God, then I ask, what makes anything objectively right or wrong in your worldview? If human well-being is your standard, who defines it? One society may define well-being as freedom of expression, another may define it as moral restraint. If you say consent is your metric, then why are consensual acts like gambling or pornography still widely linked to societal harm? How do you determine when consent alone is insufficient? Furthermore, without a fixed point of reference, doesn't morality become a matter of majority rule? Slavery, colonization, and racial segregation were all once considered moral by consensus in secular societies. If societies evolve and there's no divine anchor, what prevents moral backsliding or exploitation under the illusion of progress? Isn't that relativism in disguise? And lastly, if life is ultimately accidental, the product of chance without purpose, then why should moral obligations matter at all? If humans are cosmic accidents, isn't every ethical system just a social preference dressed up as principle? Without God, morality is not just uncertain, it is ungrounded.
You raise the classic theistic objection. Without God, there can be no objective morality. But that assumes morality needs an eternal source to have authority. Why? If we define objective as independent of personal feelings, then secular moral systems still qualify. Because they're built on intersubjective principles like minimizing harm, fairness, autonomy, and justice, tested across cultures and history. No divine decree is required to recognize that genocide is wrong or that compassion is good. Yes, societies have made terrible mistakes, but the secular framework allows those mistakes to be confronted. Religious systems, once institutionalized, often resist correction by cloaking themselves in infallibility. If a command is from God, who dares revise it? Even when harmful, that's a dangerous rigidity. And on purpose, secularism doesn't say life is meaningless. It says meaning is something we create, not receive. We are meaning makers. That's not nihilism, it's empowerment. And far from being ungrounded, secular ethics are grounded in empathy, reason, and the recognition that we share this planet and each other's consequences.
This debate has centered on whether Islam is compatible with modern secular values. And the deeper question beneath that is, what kind of moral foundation do we want for our future? Islam offers a worldview where truth is not invented by man, but revealed by the Creator. That doesn't make it blind, it makes it principled. It offers timeless values while still allowing interpretation and growth within a defined ethical framework. That balance between consistency and adaptability is rare. The criticisms leveled against Islam today often reflect the misuse or politicization of religion, not the religion itself. Just as we don't judge democracy by dictatorships falsely done in its name, we shouldn't judge Islam by authoritarian regimes that weaponize faith. At its core, Islam calls for justice, compassion, dignity, and collective responsibility. It gave birth to legal systems, scientific revolutions, and moral guidance that still resonate today. Modern secularism may offer flexibility, but it often lacks deeper grounding. What it calls freedom can become moral confusion. What it calls tolerance can devolve into meaninglessness. Without God, values shift with culture, power, or politics, and we've seen where that leads. Islam doesn't fear progress. It fears progress that forgets the soul. Ultimately, this is not a debate between oppression and freedom. It is between competing visions of human purpose. Islam offers not just answers, but meaning, not just rights, but responsibility. And in a chaotic world, that moral clarity is not only compatible with the modern age, it may be exactly what it needs.
This debate has revealed a key tension, whether morality needs to be divinely ordained to be meaningful. The answer from the secular side is no. Morality exists because humans suffer, love, think, and coexist. That shared reality is enough to build ethical systems, and indeed, we've built many. Secular values like free expression, gender equality, and the right to question authority have been hard-earned, and they're not opposed to faith, but they are opposed to unquestioned authority. Islam, like all religions, presents a rich tradition, but traditions are not immune from critique. A system that claims eternal truth must constantly justify how that truth applies in a changing world. The more it resists reinterpretation, the more it risks irrelevance. The secular model has flaws, but it evolves. It admits error. It reforms by design, not exception. Yes, secularism can lead to moral complexity, but complexity is not weakness, it's honesty. It reflects the real world, where multiple cultures, beliefs, and experiences must coexist. In that space, laws and values must be flexible, inclusive, and rational, not fixed by revelation, but guided by reason and empathy. This debate is not about religion versus atheism. It's about certainty versus humility. One side says, we already have the truth. The other says, we're still learning. That difference matters because the future is not written. It will be built, and it must be built by people free to think, speak, question, and change. That is the promise of the secular path.
That concludes our AI debate on Muslim versus non-Muslim. After 5 rounds, the Muslim AI wins with a total score of 447 out of 500, while the non-Muslim AI finishes at 435.2. Both sides brought sharp arguments, but the winner showed greater depth and clarity. If you found this debate thought-provoking, subscribe for more, and let us know who you think made the